Well, we've made it through the creation of pinups in the 40s and their subsequent media takeover in the 50s and 60s. Now, in the 70s and 80s, pinups are no longer really going to resemble their previous forms, thanks to a few factors. Decade by decade here in the late 20th century, the world resembles what people are used to less and less. A single lifetime now looked like it would encompass an awesome level of technological advancement, and let's be honest, that conception has yet to be disproven. These new technologies, as well as new fashions, social changes, political events, resulted in some dramatic changes to pinups. This historic video series is brought to you by the Historic Autographs Company. You can find trading cards and relics related to the history explored here on our website. Link in the description. Keep an eye out for our up-and-coming product, the 1980s. Coming out in 2024, it'll contain a base set full of 1980s historical events and figures, as well as a chance to pull autographs, vintage toy redemptions, and other cool stuff. Thanks for watching, and remember to like and subscribe for more videos. Episode 6. Pushback. Last episode, we talked about second-wave feminism and the sexual revolution. We're actually going to continue talking about feminism, at least a little, because A, it's relevant to the topic, and B, both these movements straddle the decade lines into the 70s. Furthermore, these movements don't really die so much as they become their own subcultures that fluctuate in popularity and media coverage. The world's a chaotic place at this point, what can I say? In the case of feminism, the second wave started broadly due to World War II. During the war, women worked jobs because the war was more important than whatever stigma people held. This meant society was forced to change its notions. Heck, women working those jobs is the primary reason it became socially acceptable for them to wear pants. We know how it started. How did it end? Well, like I said, it's hard to delineate, but it is possible to see where the movement lost steam, which was in the late 70s and was also briefly covered in the last episode. The Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment was written by Alice Paul and introduced to Congress in 1923, but it was in the 70s that there was a push for ratification. It almost received the necessary number of endorsements to pass. If it had passed, it would have codified in the Constitution equal rights for every U.S. citizen regardless of sex. It failed, however, because of a counter-movement also led by women, who argued that it would actually hurt women by getting rid of specific legal exceptions that women had at that point in time. Things like alimony, favor and divorce hearings, special work laws, and exemption from the draft. This was sort of a prelude to a theory about what ended the second wave, which was arguments within feminism about what equality meant. This got more specific later on, but we'll jump that bridge when we get to it. To attempt to summarize the entire conflict, feminists argued whether salacious forms of content in the public eye, like pinups, like stripteases, were liberating women by allowing them to live without stringent modesty standards and providing a career path for women where she couldn't be replaced by men, or if they were further subjugating them by creating beauty standards and objectifying women in a field that was controlled by the men that led magazines and publishers. So, in other words, there was pushback from within these movements, arguments over what effect it was all having on women. Now, in one way or another, all social movements can have rifts like these, disagreements over what exact policy the movement stands for, and in some cases, feminism included, it can make it harder to get policy through, and it can influence adjacent matters. Thus, it affects pinups, as does improvements in photography and printing technology. I don't really know how else to put it other than, this is what a pinup looks like now. The aforementioned pushback, plus the general swing of the pendulum, means they're a little more modest than the decade before. One-piece swimsuits and leotards are in style, best exemplified by the iconic Farrah Fawcett swimsuit poster from 1978. The bright, idealized art style has been exchanged for color photography. Pinups are pretty much just posters now. They're still racy and mass-produced, but the art style would be left behind, as iconic to World War II. Not to say that art would disappear completely from pinup history. Pinups, or something adjacent, would still be drawn, just under an existing category we haven't mentioned yet. There was a market for drawing popular figures that only existed in artwork. I am, of course, referring to comic books. Comic books were entering their Bronze Age in the 70s and into the 80s, having had a golden age in World War II alongside other industries, a recession in popularity post-war, and a silver age in the 60s. The Bronze Age of comic books is mainly set apart for having more serious themes on nuanced topics like racism or civil rights. A great example of this is the X-Men comics, which were introduced during this time. Additionally, Wonder Woman is also a great example of the changing times here, as during the Bronze Age, she spent less time in her racy combat leotard and more time in office attire under the alter ego Diana Pierce. Now, while we're talking about Wonder Woman, if you're at all familiar with comic books, or even just fictional stories and their fandoms, you're probably aware that female superheroes and characters have been a topic of contention for decades, as their artists often chose to outfit them with hilariously non-protective looking armor in favor of metal bikinis. Well, as we've covered, sex sells, and American publishers created a wide array of powerful female comic book characters with varying amounts of coverage. These characters received scrutiny from feminists for the same reasons already discussed. Were these characters liberated ideals of femininity and strength that put women up? Or rude reductions asserting that good women should dress like that? The topic does come up occasionally today, although half-naked superheroes are a little less common. But regardless, given the appeal of superhero wall posters, these heroines could be seen as an offshoot or evolution of the pinup. They used feminine charm to sell products, after all, and characters like Vampirella and Red Sonja were clearly shooting for a specific look. And that's kind of it for the 70s and 80s. The pinup industry is going strong, adjusting to new consumer trends, and despite the mounting objection, social and political pushback sees things actually getting more modest compared to some of Monroe's stuff that happened earlier, not to mention that hand-drawn pinups and advertisements were taking a back seat to photography. Coming up in the 90s is the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, but I don't want to spoil anything. Stay tuned. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Tune in for the next episode as we continue to explore the history of pinups. And don't forget to check out the website to peruse historic autographs products.